There was a wooden box sitting on the shelf in my bedroom. It has been there for over 40 years now. The hinges are a little rusty, and the latch sticks sometimes when the weather turns damp. My granddaughter asked me once what I kept inside it. I told her it held something very important. She asked if it was treasure. I thought about that for a moment. I said, yes, in a way it is. Inside that box is a letter, a single folded piece of paper, yellowed now at the edges, written in my own handwriting. A letter I wrote one quiet Sunday afternoon in the autumn of 1981. A letter addressed to my older brother, Raymond. A letter I never sent. I want to tell you the story of that letter today, not because it has a happy ending exactly, but because it taught me something that I have been turning over in my mind ever since. Something about honesty and pride, and the strange courage it takes to simply tell another person the truth about how you feel. Raymond was 3 years older than me. He was a big man, not just in body but in presence. When Raymond walked into a room, people noticed. He had a booming laugh and a way of telling stories that made everyone lean in closer. Growing up, I admired him enormously. I followed him everywhere when we were boys. Whatever Raymond did, I wanted to do too. But brothers are complicated, aren't they? By the time we were grown men, both with families of our own, both with mortgages and worries and tired evenings, something had shifted between us. I couldn't tell you exactly when it happened. That's the trouble with slow, quiet hurts. They don't arrive with a loud knock at the door. They creep in through the cracks little by little, until one day you look around and realize the room has gone cold. It started, I think, over something small. It always does. Our father had passed away in 1978, and there had been some disagreement about how things were handled. Some words were spoken, not shouted, mind you, but said in that low, tight voice that is sometimes worse than shouting. And then some words were not spoken at all, which was worse still. For nearly 3 years, Raymond and I barely talked. We saw each other at Christmas, of course, because our mother made sure of that. We shook hands, we passed the bread rolls, we asked about each other's children. But there was a distance between us that everyone at the table could feel, even if no one mentioned it. My mother, God rest her, would look at us with those sad, patient eyes of hers, and I would look away. I remember it clearly. My wife, Eleanor, had taken the children to her sister's house for the afternoon. The house was quiet in that particular way it only gets when you're completely alone in it. I was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, and I don't know what came over me. Maybe it was the season, the way the light looked coming through the window, gold and a little mournful, the way autumn light can be. But I started thinking about Raymond. Not the arguments, not the cold handshakes at Christmas, but Raymond when we were boys. Raymond teaching me to ride a bicycle on the cracked pavement outside our house. Raymond sneaking me half his slice of pie when I'd been sent to bed early without supper. Raymond sitting beside me in the hospital waiting room the night our youngest sister was born. Both of us too young to understand what was happening, just holding each other's company in the dark. I thought about all of that, and I felt something loosen in my chest. I went and found some paper, and I sat down, and I began to write. I wrote to Raymond for almost 2 hours. I told him that I missed him. I told him that I had been stubborn and proud and that I was sorry for it. I told him that I didn't entirely remember anymore what we had argued about, and that I suspected it didn't matter as much as we had both pretended it did. I wrote about our father, about the things I wished I'd said to him before he died, and how I did not want to make the same mistake with Raymond. I told him that he was my brother, and that no disagreement, however old, was worth more than that. I wrote until my hand ached. Then I folded the letter. I put it in an envelope. I wrote Raymond's name and address on the front, and then I put it in my jacket pocket. And I did not send it. Now you might wonder why. I have wondered that myself many times over the years. What stopped me? I think it was fear. Not the dramatic kind of fear, not terror or dread. Just that quiet, ordinary fear that most of us carry around without even naming it. The fear of being vulnerable. The fear of reaching out and having the other person not reach back. The fear of saying, "I have missed you," and hearing silence in return, which would somehow feel worse than the distance we already had. There was pride in it too, I'll be honest. That stiff, foolish pride that whispers to you, "Why should you be the one to go first?" And so the letter stayed in my pocket. Then it went into a drawer, then eventually into that little wooden box on my bedroom shelf. In the spring of 1982, Raymond called me. I almost didn't answer the phone. I don't know why, some old reflex of stubbornness perhaps, but I answered. His voice sounded different than I expected, quieter. He said, "I've been thinking about us, about the way things have been." I said, "So have I." There was a long pause, long enough that I could hear him breathing. Then he said, "I don't want things to go on like this." And I said, "Neither do I." That was it. That was the whole conversation, more or less. No grand speeches, no full accounting of every grievance. Just two stubborn old brothers admitting, in the simplest words they could find, that they had wasted enough time. We met for lunch the following week. We talked for 3 hours. Some of it was easy and some of it was hard, but all of it was honest. And by the time we walked out of that restaurant into the thin spring sunshine, something had been repaired. Not perfectly. There were still tender places, spots you learned not to press too hard. But it was repaired. We were brothers again, in the full sense of the word. Raymond lived until 2003. We had 20 more years together after that phone call. 20 years of Sunday lunches and fishing trips and phone calls on each other's birthdays. 20 years of knowing that whatever happened, I had a brother I could call. I think about those years often. I am so grateful for them. But I also think about the 3 years we lost. And sometimes, when I look at that letter sitting in its wooden box, I think about what might have happened if I had simply posted it. Maybe Raymond would have called sooner. Maybe we would have had 23 years instead of 20. Maybe our mother would have been spared 3 years of watching her sons pretend not to miss each other. I don't say this to punish myself. I gave up self-punishment a long time ago. It never did me any good, and I don't imagine it did you much good either. But I do say it as a kind of honest reckoning, because I think that is what wisdom really is in the end. Not the big dramatic lessons, not the moments of sudden clarity. Just the quiet willingness to sit down with yourself at the end of the day and say, here is what I did. Here is what it cost. And here is what I know now that I didn't know then. Marcus Aurelius, the old Roman emperor and philosopher, used to write to himself in exactly that spirit. He kept a private journal, a kind of letter he wrote to his own soul, reminding himself every day of what truly mattered. He wrote about how quickly life passes. He wrote about the foolishness of anger and pride. He wrote that if a man has done wrong, the honest and courageous thing is to correct it. Not tomorrow, not when conditions are perfect, but now, while there is still time. He said something I have never forgotten. He said that we should ask ourselves, in any moment of conflict or estrangement, what would be lost if I simply let this go? I think about that when I hold that little wooden letter in my mind's eye. What was lost by my silence? 3 years. Only 3 years, you might say, but 3 years is 300 Sunday afternoons. 3 years is 3 of my children's birthdays that their uncle missed. 3 years is 1,000 small moments of laughter and comfort and shared memory that were never made because 2 brothers were too proud to be the first one to say, I miss you. Come home. Marcus Aurelius, the old Roman emperor and philosopher, used to write to himself in exactly that spirit. He kept a private journal, a kind of letter he wrote to his own soul, reminding himself every day of what truly mattered. He wrote about how quickly life passes. He wrote about the foolishness of anger and pride. He wrote that if a man has done wrong, the honest and courageous thing is to correct it. Not tomorrow, not when conditions are perfect, but now, while there is still time. He said something I have never forgotten. He said that we should ask ourselves, in any moment of conflict or estrangement, what would be lost if I simply let this go? I think about that when I hold that little wooden letter in my mind's eye. What was lost by my silence? 3 years. Only 3 years, you might say, but 3 years is 300 Sunday afternoons. 3 years is 3 of my children's birthdays that their uncle missed. 3 years is 1,000 small moments of laughter and comfort and shared memory that were never made because 2 brothers were too proud to be the first one to say, I miss you. Come home. I still have the letter. I've thought about burning it, the way you might burn an old shame. But I have kept it because it reminds me of something important. It reminds me that the words we are most afraid to say are usually the words that matter most. It reminds me that courage is not always loud. Sometimes it is nothing more than picking up a phone, or licking an envelope, or simply walking across a room and putting your hand on someone's shoulder. And it reminds me that time is not something we can borrow against. We spend so much of our lives assuming there will be more time, more chances, more Christmases. And often, thank God, there are. Raymond and I had 20 more years, but we almost didn't. We nearly let pride rob us of all of it. If you have a letter you haven't sent, not a letter of paper necessarily, but a letter of the heart, I would ask you gently to consider sending it. Today, if you can, or tomorrow at the latest. Life is patient with us on the whole, but it is not infinitely patient. The person you are thinking of right now as I say these words, and I suspect there is someone, they are worth more than your pride, and so are you. You know, I used to think that a big falling out needed a big reason, a shouting match, a terrible betrayal. But Raymond and I, we never had any of that. It was just small things, a comment here, a silence there, a moment where I chose not to call and then told myself I'd call tomorrow. And tomorrow turned into a week, and a week turned into a month. By the time I noticed how far apart we'd drifted, it felt too awkward to even explain. That's the thing about small hurts. They don't make a noise when they're growing. I remember standing at the post box. I can picture it even now, a gray Tuesday morning, a letter in my hand. And something in me said, not yet. I told myself I was waiting for the right moment. Waiting until things were less raw. Waiting until I had better words. But here is what I know now, looking back with these old eyes. That voice was not wisdom. That voice was pride. And pride, I have come to understand, is one of the most convincing liars you will ever meet in your life. It wasn't logic that made me pick up that pen and write to Raymond. It wasn't sitting down and reasoning through the argument and deciding who was right. What broke through was a memory, just a small one. Raymond crouching down on the pavement outside our old house, holding the back of my bicycle seat and telling me he wouldn't let go. And then, when I was finally pedaling on my own, I turned around and he was 20 feet behind me, grinning from ear to ear. I had done it, and he had been the one cheering loudest. When I remembered that, the argument we'd had just seemed so terribly, terribly thin. That Sunday afternoon, I wrote for 2 hours straight. And I will tell you something. It was one of the most relieving things I have ever done in my life. Not because anyone read it. Raymond never saw a word of it. But something about putting it all down honestly, without performing, without protecting my pride. Just saying the plain truth of how I felt. It was like setting down a weight I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying. I think that's what old Marcus Aurelius was doing too, all those centuries ago, writing to himself every night in that private journal of his. Not for anyone else, just to be honest with himself. There is a great, quiet freedom in that. When Raymond finally called in the spring of 1982, I was half expecting some kind of speech, some formal accounting of everything. But that's not what happened. He just said, "I don't want things to go on like this." And I said, "Neither do I." That was it. No eloquence, no grand gesture. Just two tired brothers admitting what they'd both known for a long time. And I realized then that I had been waiting for the perfect words, when really the only words that mattered were the honest ones, even if they were plain, even if they were small. Raymond died in 2003, and I am grateful, deeply, genuinely grateful, for every single year we had after that phone call. 20 years of fishing trips and birthday calls and Sunday lunches that went on longer than they should have. But sometimes, when it's quiet and I'm sitting with my thoughts, I do a little arithmetic. 20 years instead of 23. 3 years we lost for no good reason. 3 years of Christmases and grandchildren being born, and ordinary Tuesday evenings on the phone. I don't say it to be hard on myself. I say it because it's true. And the truth, even when it stings a little, is worth knowing. I said to myself for 3 years that it was too late to repair things with Raymond. Too much time had passed. Too much had been said or left unsaid. It would be awkward now. Where would we even begin? And then Raymond called one ordinary spring morning, and we began in about 30 seconds. That's all it took. 30 seconds of plain, honest words. The door, I had convinced myself, was sealed shut. It opened with hardly any effort at all. That's the thing about the people who truly love us. They're usually far more ready to forgive than we've given them credit for. We just have to be willing to knock. There is a particular kind of quiet that comes in the evening of a life. A stillness that lets you see things more clearly than you could when you were busy and young and certain you had all the time in the world. In that stillness, the things that once seemed so important, who was right, who went first, who said what and when, they grow small. And the things that are truly important, the faces of the people you have loved, grow large. If you are carrying an old hurt today, or an unsent letter of your own, I hope this story has offered you a little encouragement, not pressure and not guilt. You had enough of those in your life. Just a gentle, warm encouragement from one old heart to another. The people we love are not always there for as long as we expect them to be. And we are not either, if we are being honest with ourselves. That letter in my wooden box taught me that the most important conversations are the ones we are most reluctant to begin. And it taught me that when love is on one side of the silence, and only pride is on the other, love is always worth more. It is never too late to send the letter. It is almost never too late.